mighty name of Christ Jesus. Amen.
Well, good morning. Thanks for spending part of your Good Friday together. It's good to be together. Good to be here and take a moment to pause and rest under the cross this morning. Time has a funny way of flying by. There's things that happen in life that they both seem like they happened yesterday, but yet you got old and it wasn't yesterday. It was like 20 plus years ago. And I still remember when my wife and we bought our first house. It seems like yesterday, but, well, she's still young and beautiful, but I got old. And so when we bought that first house, though, I really felt in over my head in so many different ways. And one of the reasons I felt in over my head was I have to be honest that my level of competence when it comes to anything hands-on and tool related is actually embarrassingly low. And if I'm even more honest with you, in 20 plus years, I can't say that has changed very much. And so in that first house, one of the things we had to do was finish the landscaping. And I had never finished any landscaping before. And it required a retaining wall in the front yard. I didn't even know what a retaining wall was at that point. But I thought, left to my own devices, I could build a retaining wall. And I felt confident about that. But I felt equally confident in that moment that if I did build that retaining wall, for a moment it would look great. But on that first big rainfall or that next Alberta wind that came through, it may not be a wall anymore. And so it wouldn't have lasted. And thankfully, my father-in-law stepped in graciously. He is the exact opposite of me. He's meticulous, he's patient, and he's incredibly skilled with anything that you can build with your hands. And he didn't just come to help, he came to actually do it right, which I know I wouldn't have been able to do. And so I got to help him, although if we keep being honest here, help is probably a generous use of the term. I got to watch him really well, do the work really well. But I'll never forget what he focused on. Again, I didn't know what to focus on initially, but before a single block was set, he spent time on the foundation. He was digging it out. He was making sure it was solid and stable and able to hold everything that was going to be built on top of that. It didn't look impressive at the moment, but it was actually everything. And it took the most time, and it was the hardest, most labor-intensive part of the job. And here's what's amazing. Every once in a while, I still drive by that house. And that wall is still there, and it's standing strong and straight. And the plants that we put in it all those years ago, they're thriving and they're big and they're beautiful. And it's all because of what you really don't get to see. It's the foundation that is underneath that wall. And because the foundation makes all the difference in when you're building something. And in many ways, that's the story of the Old Testament. God, in his wisdom and mercy, he laid a foundation for his people through the law, the sacrificial system, and the temple. It revealed his holiness, and it exposed the depth of humanity's sin. And it established a way for people to be able to approach him. But it was never meant to be the final structure. It was provisional. It was given for a time, pointing beyond itself. The sacrifices had to be repeated over and over because they could never actually really fully remove sin. The law could diagnose the human condition, but it could never heal it. The entire system was, in a sense, waiting and anticipating for a greater fulfillment. It prepared the ground, but it could not secure a foundation that would be able to last, which means something deeper still had to be dealt with. And any true rebuild begins long before anything new is visible. It starts with the work beneath the surface, the part where what's broken and unstable has to be dealt with. You don't build something lasting on top of something that cannot hold it. And that's exactly where Good Friday meets us. Because before anything is rebuilt, something always has to be torn down. And we often want to move quickly to what comes next, to life, to hope, to resurrection. But the story doesn't begin there. Before anything is made new, something has to be removed. Before anything is restored, something has to be confronted and fully dealt with. The cross is not just a place where Jesus suffered. It is the place where God decisively deals with everything that stands against us. It is where the old is brought to an end so that something entirely new can begin. What looks like loss is actually the necessary work of clearing the way. So before we rush to what is rebuilt, we pause here for a moment this morning. Because Good Friday is the moment when God tears down what could never be repaired by us, so that he can rebuild what only he is able to make new. And so with that in mind, let's jump into our passage for this morning. It's in Colossians chapter 2, verses 13 and 14. It says, "And you were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh. God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses, by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross." Paul says, you were dead in your trespasses. Paul doesn't leave room for soft language here. He never really does. He's a pretty blunt dude. This isn't about being a little lost or needing to get back on track. He uses a word that shuts down every illusion of our ability to self-repair. He says dead. And that word matters more than we often realize, because if we misunderstand our condition, we will misunderstand what the cross is here to accomplish. If the problem is small, then the solution is able to be small. But Paul makes it clear that the problem couldn't be managed, it couldn't be improved. It was a total mess, and it needed a new, complete solution. And in the same way, you wouldn't try to build on a foundation that is completely given way. God does not attempt to renovate what is spiritually lifeless. There's no patching this, there's no propping it back up, there's no reinforcing it, there's no slowly working its way back to health. Our condition before Christ wasn't damaged, it was finished. That's what sin does. And Paul uses the word in this passage, trespasses, to help us understand it more clearly. A trespass is a deliberate crossing of a boundary. It's stepping over a clear line that has been set for us. It's not an accidental or unaware. It carries the idea of knowing where the line is, and it's choosing to step over it anyway. It makes sin deeply personal. And it's not just something is wrong in the world, it's that we have participated in that wrong. We're crossing boundaries God has established out of his love for our good. And these boundaries were never arbitrary. They were meant to protect what God created for wholeness and connection, our relationship with him and one another and even creation itself. So when we trespass, the damage isn't just legal, it's actually relational. Sin fractures trust, and it distorts love, and it pulls us out of the life that we are actually created to live. What was meant for connection becomes marked by separation, and what was designed for flourishing becomes shaped by harm. But the Bible also uses a broader word for sin that means to miss the mark. It's the picture of aiming at the target of God's design for our lives and then falling short of it. So together, these ideas, they give us this picture that we don't just fall short of who God created us to be, we also step outside of what he has commanded. Sin is both our condition, but it is also our choice. And it shows up in our actions, but it actually runs much deeper than our behavior. It is a heart that is in misalignment with God, and it chooses its own way as it knows better than the one who actually created us. And that's why the consequence of sin is so serious. Sin doesn't just make life harder, it separates us from the life God intended us to live. We aren't people who simply needed help getting back on track. We were people who had no life in us to actually begin with. And this is where Good Friday becomes so necessary. Because before anything can be rebuilt, God has to deal with the reality of what is actually there for us. The old life, the old standing, the old condition cannot be improved, and it cannot be saved in its current form. It has to be brought to an end, which means the cross is not God trying to make a bad situation just a little bit better. It is God decisively dealing with something that could never be repaired by us, so something entirely new is able to begin. Paul continues, and he tells us not just what we were, but he tells us what God has done. It says he canceled the record of our debt that stood against us, nailing it to the cross. This is where the rebuilding truly begins, right? By something that's being torn down. And Paul shifts the image here into this legal and kind of financial language. He describes a record of debt, a written account of everything that stood against us. Every trespass, every moment we crossed the line, every way that we fell short. Not vague, and it's not general, but it's detailed and complete. And this wasn't just a record, it actually carried legal demands. It wasn't just information, it was actually a case, and there was a verdict, and a standing judgment existed over our lives. And left alone, that record doesn't fade with time, it doesn't get buried, it stands. But Paul says something in this passage that is absolutely remarkable, and something that we should never brush past, but only pause and remember over and over. Paul says this remarkable statement. He says, God canceled it. God canceled it. He didn't reduce it. He didn't bury it. He didn't ignore it. He canceled it. And this word carries this idea of wiping something away completely. As ink removed from a page, leaving no trace behind. What once stood against you has been erased in full. And not just removed, but here's the key. It has been replaced with restoration. This is about a relationship being made right again. What the Old Testament pointed towards through sacrifice and repetition is fulfilled here, finally and fully at the cross. Which means we're no longer striving to make ourselves right with God. The work has actually been done for us. And it wasn't done reluctantly. It was done out of love. The reality is, if we could have dealt with sin ourselves, maybe we would have, right? But we couldn't. And so Jesus did it for us. And that changes how we respond. We don't live in guilt trying to repay what has already been settled. We live in gratitude because what we could never accomplish has been completed for us, completely and lovingly. And then Paul tells us this, says he took it and he nailed it to the cross. And in the Roman world, the charges against a criminal, they were written out and publicly displayed on the cross above their head as a declaration of their guilt. But at the cross, Jesus had no crimes of his own. The charges being displayed are ours, every sin for all of humanity. And in that moment, what stood against us, it's not just exposed, but it's actually executed. This is the demolition. The record is gone. The case is closed. The weight that once sat over our life of guilt and shame and condemnation, it's all been dealt with fully and finally at the cross. Which means when God begins to rebuild, he's not working around what was there before. He has cleared it completely. The ground is ready for what is next. And so Good Friday doesn't just stop at what is removed. Paul says, God made you alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses. And this is where we begin to see that the cross, it's not only about the demolition of what was there, but it is about the preparation of what is to come. Because God is not simply clearing away the old, he is establishing something entirely new. And so forgiveness in this sense is not just about the absence of guilt. It is about the restoration of relationship. It means that what was once separated from God has been fully dealt with, so that now you can stand differently, completely differently before him. And at the heart of this is what theologians have often called the great exchange. J.I. Packer says, the essence of sin is humanity substituting itself for God. The essence of salvation is God substituting himself for humanity. What was ours is taken by Christ. What is his is given to us. That's a remarkable truth. Our sin is removed, but more than that, a new standing for all of us is secured. We are no longer defined by what stood against us, but by what Christ has accomplished for us. This is not God repairing your old life. It is God giving you a new foundation altogether, one that we are to lean into. Because God does not rebuild on what you were. He builds on what Jesus finished on the cross. Which means the future of your life with God, it's not actually anchored to your past or to your efforts or to your ability to just try to hold it all together all the time. It is anchored to the finished work of Christ. And that foundation does not, and it never will shift. It'll never fall down. And this brings us back to where we started. That wall at our first house is standing, not necessarily because how it looked on the surface, but because of what was underneath. The time, the care, the attention to the foundation, that's what made it last. And in the same way, what God has done for us is not just something visible on the surface of our lives. At the cross, God didn't just come to improve what was already there. He cleared it. He dealt with everything that could no longer hold the weight of what he was about to build upon our lives. And that's what the Old Testament had been pointing towards all along. Every sacrifice, every offering, every moment that people came to the altar, it was all preparing for this. It showed the cost of sin. It revealed the need for something more. But it could never fully remove what stood against us until the cross. Because on Good Friday, what was temporary gave way to the final. What was repeated gave way to what is finished. What could never fully deal with sin was replaced by that one sacrifice, that one person for all. And so today we should not rush past this moment. We should pause here for a moment. Because Good Friday is not the story of a distant God scheming or condemning from afar. It is not ultimately a story about how bad you are. It is the moment where everything that stood against us is brought to the end. At the cross, your sin is dealt with. Your debt is canceled. Your guilt is removed. Your shame is carried and your record is erased. Your condemnation is silenced and your separation from God is finally overcome. And what looks like loss is actually the beginning of restoration, a relationship made right, hope breaking through, and a new foundation that is being laid. And so maybe today, instead of rushing past this moment, we pause and we receive it. Not with a sense of guilt that keeps us looking inward and heavy over and over and over, but with gratitude that lifts our eyes up to what Christ has done for us. This is where love meets us. This is where the relationship is restored. This is where hope begins again. And maybe for some of us, that changes even how we respond. Today, perhaps it is not tears of shame, but it is tears of gratitude. Not a quiet dwelling on guilt, but an absolute deep cry to the depths of our soul for the freedom that we have now received through Jesus Christ. Because what was torn down at the cross has made way for something new. New life, new relationship, restoration with God. And this is why Jesus, when he was hanging on the cross, he was able to say those words, "It is finished." Because the work beneath the surface was done. The foundation was secure. And maybe this is what Good Friday reminds us of in a deeper way. Because the cross doesn't just tell us what God has done for us. It shows us that we have a God who is with us. And if you've ever wondered whether God understands suffering, this is your answer. If you've ever questioned where God is when life feels heavy, when things break, when the weight of it all just feels like too much, this is your answer. God is not distant from suffering. He is in it. He entered it. And at the cross, we don't see a God who stands far off. He's not watching from a distance. We see a God who steps into the weight of all sin for all humanity, into the depth of pain, into the reality of loss, and he carries it. Which means whatever we walk through, whatever we carry today, we never carry it alone. And it also, this truth of the cross, also reshapes how we live our life. Because if this is who God is, and we are called to reflect him, then we are not to turn away from the broken places. We are not to avoid the hard moments. We are not to step back from the needs that surround us. But we are to be people who stay in it, that we care, that we carry, that we show up in quiet and steady ways, no matter what the cost may be. Because we do in those moments, we do as people who have been rebuilt at the cross. And so this morning, as we come to the table, we come before the cross. Because everything we've talked about today, everything that has been torn down, everything that has been made new, it finds its center right here. The cross was not an accident. The cross wasn't forced upon Jesus. It was a choice made out of immense love for you and for me and for all of humanity. Jesus stepped into this willingly. He carried what we could not carry. He took on what we could not fix, not because we earned it, not really because we even deserved it, but because he loves us. And it's through the cross, he offers us something we could never achieve on our own. He offers us restoration. Relationship with God made right again. And this is not something we strive for, but it's something that we receive. And Paul says in Ephesians, "For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God." This is a gift. Not something you build or fix. A gift of grace and love. A gift of restored relationship with God. And this is what we remember when we come to the table. The bread that represents his body, broken for us. The cup represents his blood, poured out for each of us. Not just a symbol of suffering, but an absolute declaration of unconditional love for all of us. So as we receive the elements today, we receive them as people who have been invited back into relationship. Because of the cross, the foundation has been laid. And because of the cross, God has chosen to come near to us. In Matthew, it says, "Now as they were eating, Jesus took bread, and after blessing it, broke it, and gave it to the disciples. And he said, 'Take this, eat this. This is my body.' And he took a cup. And when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, 'Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins.'" Let's pray. Jesus, we come before you with humble and grateful hearts. Thank you for the cross, for choosing to carry what we were not able to carry. Thank you for your love that restores what was broken and brings us back into a relationship with you. Help us to receive this gift of grace, not striving, but trusting what you have finished. Would you meet us here in this moment as we remember your sacrifice? And in that moment, would you continue to draw us near to you?